Right now, history is being written in real time, visible to the entire globe. The same leader who once ignited one of the most intense trade conflicts in modern U.S. history, the man who labeled China a currency manipulator and imposed tariffs as steep as 147% on Chinese imports, the man who vowed America would never yield to Beijing, is today seated at a banquet table within the Great Hall of the People. He shakes hands with Xi Jinping, smiles for cameras, and behind closed doors, analysts, allies, and rivals alike are all asking the identical question. What concessions did Donald Trump make to reach this moment? To understand the magnitude of this event, we must trace back to its origins. This narrative didn't start last week nor last year. It has been building for months, shaped by a chain of sudden reversals, unexpected compromises, and a geopolitical game many now argue China has mastered. Cast your mind back to early 2025. Donald Trump had just begun his second term in the White House, and he wasted no time making his mark. He immediately reinstated and drastically expanded tariffs on Chinese goods. The administration presented this as a decisive correction, a reckoning for decades of what they branded as unfair trade practices. By April 2025, the so-called Liberation Day tariffs had escalated duties on Chinese imports to levels unseen in 100 years. The message from Washington was unmistakable. The era of leniency was over, replaced by full confrontation. China, however, did not falter. Beijing responded quickly and with equal force. It mirrored tariffs, dollar for dollar, placed American firms on economic blacklists, and restricted exports of rare earth minerals, the critical elements powering everything from electric vehicles to fighter jets to the smartphones in your hands. And here, the story began to pivot. Many observers underestimated China's leverage, but Beijing had genuine clout and was ready to deploy it. As rare earth exports were curtailed in spring 2025, American manufacturers grew anxious. Supply chains, forged over decades, started showing cracks. Defense contractors issued warnings. Tech companies flagged urgent shortages. The Trump administration, which had promised economic dominance, suddenly confronted a stark reality. The tariff offensive had made headlines, but it was also inflicting significant domestic pain. By May 2025, the first major shift occurred quietly in Geneva, Switzerland. Over a weekend, American and Chinese negotiators sat down and emerged with an agreement. Both sides consented to reduce a substantial portion of their tariffs, cutting rates by 115%, while maintaining a baseline 10% duty. The White House declared it a historic victory. Critics dismissed it as a retreat cloaked in triumph. Regardless, the era of punitive tariffs was over, ushering in a 90-day pause for negotiations. That summer, discussions pressed on. In October 2025, the two leaders convened in Busan, South Korea, meeting face-to-face at a summit. Trump and Xi reached a broader accord. China committed to purchasing enormous volumes of American soybeans, 25 million metric tons annually over 3 consecutive years. It agreed to lift export restrictions on rare earth minerals and remove retaliatory tariffs targeting American agricultural exports. In return, the United States quietly shelved some of its most ambitious structural demands, the policies initially aimed at fundamentally altering China's economic operations. The aggressive pushes to dismantle state subsidies and open internal markets were abandoned. What remained was a controlled trade framework, not genuine reform. At the time, foreign policy analysts noted a subtle but critical development that escaped widespread attention. China had not only weathered the trade conflict, it had emerged more confident than before. Officials in Beijing observed the Trump administration back down and took careful note. The unpredictability that once gave Washington an edge gradually eroded. Chinese strategists concluded they could withstand Trump's pressure, absorb the disruptions, and ultimately draw the United States back to the negotiating table on terms more favorable to Beijing. Now, we arrive at the present, May 14th, 2026. Donald Trump is in Beijing on an official state visit, marking the first time in nearly a decade that a sitting American president has set foot in China. The visual impact is striking. Trump arrives at Beijing Capital International Airport, greeted by Chinese Vice President Han Zhang and a military honor guard. The motorcade winds through the streets of Beijing. He meets at the Great Hall of the People, attends a state banquet, and poses for carefully orchestrated photographs at the Temple of Heaven. Beneath the ceremonial display, profound questions are swirling, and some answers are already unsettling Washington's allies. The critical discussion revolves around what Trump carried with him to Beijing, and more importantly, what he may have already surrendered before touching down. In the weeks preceding this summit, a statement from Trump sent tremors through diplomatic circles. At the White House, he told reporters he planned to discuss arms sales to Taiwan with Xi Jinping. That single remark set off alarm bells from Taipei to Tokyo to Brussels, because American arms transfers to Taiwan have formed the backbone of Pacific deterrence for decades. Taiwan currently has a pending arms package valued at $14 billion from Washington. That package has languished in limbo, quietly postponed, and the timing is far from accidental. China's stance on Taiwan remains unwavering. Beijing considers the island a breakaway province destined to be reunified under Communist Party authority. It interprets U.S. weapons sales to Taiwan as a direct provocation, a breach of what it calls the fundamental spirit of U.S. China diplomacy. Now, with Trump seated across from Xi, Beijing sees an opportunity. Analysts have highlighted a likely concession. Trump could explicitly or implicitly delay or block the arms package. He could temper public statements regarding Taiwan's independence. He could offer Xi anything that Beijing could frame domestically as American acknowledgement of the one China principle. A former senior American official described the stakes plainly in the days leading up to the summit. Any such concession would send a seismic and destabilizing message to Taipei. It would communicate that Taiwan's security is negotiable, that it can be used as a bargaining chip whenever Washington urgently needs something else. And at this moment, America does indeed need something else urgently. That urgent matter is Iran. This brings us to another dimension of the summit that has received scant attention outside foreign policy circles. The United States has been engaged in a conflict with Iran. American military efforts include a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the planet's most vital shipping corridors, through which a significant fraction of the world's oil supply transits. The blockade has rattled energy markets worldwide, triggered substantial economic disruptions, and placed Trump in a paradox of his own making. He initiated a military confrontation that he now urgently wants to resolve. Yet he cannot do so without cooperation from the one nation that wields the greatest leverage over Tehran, China. China is Iran's largest purchaser of oil and maintains deep economic and diplomatic ties with the Iranian government. Should Beijing choose to apply pressure on Tehran, threaten to curtail oil purchases, or use its diplomatic influence to push Iran toward negotiations, it could significantly accelerate an end to the conflict. Trump is acutely aware of this. His team has signaled for weeks that reopening the Strait of Hormuz is a top priority of the Beijing visit. He seeks Xi's assistance. He needs Xi's cooperation. And Xi understands precisely what that entails. China enters this summit not as a supplicant, but as a dominant player holding leverage the United States cannot ignore. Days before Trump's arrival, the Chinese embassy in Washington made the stakes unmistakably clear. It posted a pointed message on social media outlining 4 red lines that must not be crossed: Taiwan, democracy and human rights, China's political system, and China's right to development. This was no diplomatic formality. It served as a public pre-negotiation warning, signaling exactly where Beijing's limits lay before Trump even landed. The joint statement issued after the first day of meetings offers revealing insight in both its inclusions and omissions. On Iran, both parties agreed the Strait of Hormuz must remain open and that Iran must not be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. That much was shared publicly. But crucially, and this is what has analysts buzzing, Taiwan received no mention in the joint statement. For China, that omission may itself be a strategic triumph. Getting the United States to come to Beijing, pose for photographs, sign agreements, and abstain from publicly reaffirming support for Taiwan's security is a powerful signal. Beijing knows how to interpret such signals. Meanwhile, the White House presents an entirely different narrative. Officials surrounding Trump describe the visit as a major victory, demonstrating his unique capacity to engage rivals, forge agreements, and steer America's competitors toward resolution through personal diplomacy. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent emphasized that Trump remains resolute on the core issues that matter most to Washington. The administration points to potential trade deals, orders for Boeing aircraft from China, commitments on agricultural exports, and tariff adjustments as proof that this trip is producing tangible results for American businesses and workers. And to be fair, some of these outcomes are real. U.S. farmers have a vested interest in soybean sales, and U.S. aerospace firms are focused on aircraft contracts. These gains are not insignificant. Yet the broader strategic landscape demands closer scrutiny. The network of alliances, deterrence measures, and security guarantees that the United States spent decades constructing across the Asia-Pacific to preserve regional stability is showing signs of strain. America's allies are observing this summit with unease, trying to temper their concerns politely. Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Australia are all paying close attention. They are grappling with the same question Taiwan is asking. If Trump is willing to place arms sales on the table, what else is negotiable? What does the American security umbrella actually signify in an era of transactional diplomacy? Experts from major institutions have been candid in their assessments. China, they argue, has quietly gained an increasing degree of influence over the way the United States executes its national security strategy. The trade war, originally designed to enforce structural change in China's economy, concluded with Washington accepting Beijing's economic model largely intact. The export control regime, intended to prevent China from accessing advanced technologies, has been partially relaxed as part of ongoing deal-making. Now, the most sensitive security issue in the entire U.S. China relationship, Taiwan, is being discussed by the American president himself as a negotiable matter. China's confidence heading into this summit was not artificially created, it was earned. Beijing had strategists who, from the start of the trade war, argued that steadfast resistance would eventually force Washington to seek an exit. They were correct. They anticipated that America's reliance on Chinese-controlled critical minerals would provide Beijing with real economic leverage. And again, they were right. They also argued that Trump's transactional instincts, his focus on high-profile deals over structural reform, could be exploited to China's advantage. While the final impact of that calculation is still uncertain, early signs do not inspire confidence among those who hope to see America maintain its long-term strategic position. Domestic politics add another layer of complexity. Trump entered office promising unprecedented toughness on China. The America First framework was meant to hold China accountable, to end naive engagement in one-sided trade. His supporters believed in this approach, and many Americans did as well. Now, he sits in Beijing across from Xi Jinping, attending a state banquet and discussing Taiwan arms sales as if they were a negotiable line item. The question facing his base and the broader public is whether what they are witnessing is true strength or a form of accommodation masquerading as strength. The distinction is crucial. Genuine diplomatic engagement between the world's two most powerful nations is both necessary and legitimate. No serious observer advocates permanent confrontation between Washington and Beijing. Yet engagement that quietly sacrifices strategic commitments, leaving allies uncertain about American reliability while enabling one party to extract concessions without delivering structural change in return, is something else entirely. That is not deal-making. It is a different form of strategic compromise. As the summit unfolds, more direct meetings remain on the schedule. The world is watching closely. Traders are scanning for signals on tariffs and supply chains. Defense analysts are examining any language concerning Taiwan. Diplomats throughout Asia are assessing whether America's word still carries the weight it once did. In Beijing, Chinese officials observe with calm confidence, convinced they understand Donald Trump better than he understands himself. The outcomes of the coming days will ripple far beyond headlines about soybeans, Boeing, or rare earth minerals. Determining who entered the summit with the stronger position and who leaves with the superior deal may take months or even years to fully discern. Early indications, however, suggest that the nation approaching this summit with greater confidence, clarity of purpose, and a readiness to say no was not the United States. More than any single policy decision, that reality should give Americans pause. This is the complete picture as it stands today. The story is still evolving, and the summit continues. More developments will surface in the hours and days ahead. Stay informed, stay alert, and continue following every unfolding moment. Share this analysis with someone who needs to grasp what is truly happening in Beijing right now. We will keep watching, reporting, and providing insight as events continue to unfold.